One of the things I tell people, when you go from being a senior individual contributor to being an entry-level executive, one of the big mindset shifts is you go from thinking about your organization as a thing that is frictionful, that you have to navigate through and tough your way past it, to thinking about the organization as a resource that can actually create leverage for you and for your agenda for your team. And so you flip the switch from going from like, oh, I have to explain this product initiative to this person and I just have to get through it so that they can give me the dependency alignment that I'm asking for, to no, actually, I need to go throughout the organization and to evangelize what I'm doing, why I'm doing it, to invite feedback, and to create like a set of champions throughout the organization, this cross-functional delivery machine, if you will, that's going to support my agenda and be inclined to say yes to me and to believe that I'm credible.
Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Supra Insider podcast. This time, Mark and I are joined by Brenton Sellati. Brenton's the incoming VP of Product at Pi Insurance, which is a Series D insurance tech company, where Brenton's going to be leading the product team and leveraging his past experience from driving innovation strategy and product management at Liberty Mutual Insurance, where he started his product career. Between his time at Liberty Mutual and Pi Insurance Now, Brenton had a stellar run for over 5 years at Wayfair, where he worked his way up from managing 4 teams as a group PM, all the way up to leading 50 teams as a senior director of product management. This episode goes into that secret sauce that really enabled Brenton's career to take off and scale at Wayfair to the point where he was a leader supporting 300 plus people.
Our conversation covered a lot of ground. We touched on why most middle managers are incompetent, how to build a high trust, high candor relationship with people, the ways to create true leverage as your scope grows over time, why it's impossible to have clear thinking without writing. We also touched on the importance of designing organizations in a way that minimizes cross-org dependencies, and a lot more.
Brenton's definitely one of the most structured thinkers I've ever met in product leadership, which is saying a lot. He's a member of the Supra community that I'm part of, that Mark started, and he's a consistent contributor to a lot of interesting discussions that are top of mind for people within the group. I feel really lucky to be able to learn from him on a regular basis, and I think that you'll find the density of insights that he shared in this conversation might make it worth listening to twice. I know I'm certainly going to go back and listen. We know you're going to love this conversation and appreciate you listening. Enjoy.
Brenton, you had quite the epic run at Wayfair in the last 5.5 years. You work your way up from associate director all the way to senior director, I believe running a team over 350, including engineers, PMs, which is an insane scale. So maybe the first question for you is, how have you created leverage for yourself at every step in your career? And maybe let's start when you were an IC all the way to where you are now.
So I first got into product management at Liberty Mutual when I was in their innovation lab. And up until that point, I probably had about 7 or 8 years of IC experience doing other things. But there was this really interesting phenomenon that was a management accelerator for me, which was that we would have these junior employees come into the lab for a 3-month rotation, high potential folks from across the organization. And so I had this constant rotation of folks that were coming in for 3 months, onboarding, and someone else was offboarding. And so over the course of about 2.5 years of doing that, I probably saw 15 to 20 people come through that I was essentially their manager for 3 months. And so that gave me this really accelerated crash course in how to do all those management rhythms in a very standardized way, and to also work with a spectrum of people that were really high potential, people that were average potential, and then folks that struggled a bit and having to navigate those different situations. And so then when I joined Wayfair, I started off as essentially a group PM managing 3 to 4 teams, and came in like very intentional about, how do I create leverage from my team? How do I not make myself this bottleneck and this single point of failure? But I actually, as a leader, I need to coach and teach and create leverage from my team. And I just kept on tackling big problems that I was excited about and investing in the people that I worked with. And we can talk more about this, but building what I call high trust, high candor relationships. And that was the wave that propelled me. And if you think then more broadly about what it's like going from managing 3 to 4 teams and then to managing something like 50 teams, that's very, very different. And there were definitely growing pains and times where I had to take the mental model that I've been using to manage an organization of a given size. And as you start to horizontally scale it more and more, you lose that ability to maintain that depth. And so you have to find a way to raise your level of abstraction, use less information, but to use it to, again, find those points of leverage for the company, for the organization. I can talk more about that in detail if you want, but really it was definitely a lot of stretch, a lot of discomfort, and a lot of reflection is what I used to help me think about how I grew and maintained a sense of sanity, but also being able to productively do that job and to be competent as you have to stretch really quickly.
One follow-up I have on that, and I'm excited to go deep with you on all of the framing that you just set for us. When you think about points of leverage, is there a category of a point of leverage that you discovered as you settled into your role leading a larger organization that maybe you weren't even aware of as a point of leverage when you were earlier in your career?
Yeah, actually, one of the things I tell people when you go from being a senior individual contributor to being an entry level executive, one of the big mindset shifts is you go from thinking about your organization as a thing that is frictionful, that you have to navigate through and tough your way past it, to thinking about the organization as a resource that can actually create leverage for you and for your agenda for your team. And so you flip the switch from going from like, oh, I have to explain this product initiative to this person and I just have to get through it so that they can give me the dependency alignment that I'm asking for, to no, actually, I need to go throughout the organization and to evangelize what I'm doing, why I'm doing it, to invite feedback, and to create like a set of champions throughout the organization, this cross-functional delivery machine, if you will, that's going to support my agenda and be inclined to say yes to me and to believe that I'm credible. And so that's like a big mindset shift in terms of how you look at that. And that was something that I went through and that I then started to coach my team on as I reflected on that.
Sounds almost like making a transition from seeing the people that you work with in the broader organization as maybe like potential adversaries or people that could get in the way of the things that you're trying to do, to people that are really an army that could become very much providing tailwinds to the thing that you think needs to be done and getting people excited about that.
Yeah, I use that exact word with my team. It's running downhill, it's running with the wind at your back, it's having that tailwind, it's reversing the headwind. And as a leader of a large organization, part of your job and part of what allows you to create leverage for your team is to both do that yourself and to coach your team on how to do that. Because if you're running downhill, you're going to be able to move so much faster with less energy. And that's fundamentally what leverage is. It's finding those areas where the effort you put in provides an outsized return. And certainly in large companies, I think there's a lot of leverage to be had with that. And Wayfair, just for context, when I joined, it was probably about 5,000 or 6,000 people total, maybe around 1,500 in tech. It went through a rise and fall while I was there. But even when I departed, I think we had around 3,000 total folks in technology and around 6,000 or 7,000 total corporate staff. So if you're in a really large company, like a lot of the tier one tech companies, what I'm describing will be very relevant. But if you're working in a much smaller company, typically under 500 people or under 1,000 people, where you can have a relationship and awareness of everyone, there's a degree of this which is always going to be valuable, but you're going to have to calibrate how much leverage you'll get from that because the organization is a lot smaller and so there's a lot more shared context. That's really what the purpose of that is. Like, I have found that people generally 80% of the time want to do what they feel and believe is the best thing for the company. And a lot of disagreements just come from having a differing perspective on what that is, because you see the world through your own lens of perspective. And so with these roadshows and for this consensus building, what you're really doing is trying to offer someone your framing on a subject and to see if that convinces them and is compelling to them. And if it is, you can often then start to reason about why the thing you're advocating for is best for the company. Or you can get signal from them that helps you update your view. And by the way, when you listen to people and you like modify your view even incrementally, they love it because they feel like, oh, this person is open to my ideas. They're not just coming in to steamroll me. And so eventually you can come to that common view of things, and then you'll usually agree on what the best course of action is for the company overall. That's like the 80% case. The 20% case is when you do that and you have agreement in principle, but the outcome of your recommendation disincentivizes the other party. Yes, I agree with you. This is the most important area that we should be investing in, but like it's going to automate my team away. So that's where you have to be a little bit delicate and start to think about some of the political dimensions of how you deal with things. But in my experience, most of the time, large, high-performing organizations, people want to do what's right for the company. And if you can give them a common framing to debate and agree upon that, then that's what creates that sense of tailwind and buy-in that isn't just like horse trading, but people are truly internally aligned to that perspective.
Yeah. And what I love about this advice too is I think a lot of people, when they're advising someone who wants to get into management, they say, hey, get experience mentoring people, or maybe try to get an APM so they can get the reps in of what it's like to manage someone. But what I really like about your advice is actually you don't really need that. Your growth is completely in your control. You can start doing all the things that you said as an IC without having a big team of PMs under you. So I'd love to get your thoughts on if an IC PM that's trying to get into management is listening to this, what are some tactical things that they can start doing today to flex that muscle of evangelizing their ideas, evangelizing their roadmap?
So let me take a little bit of a different angle on that, which is what is the product? And I think there's three major step shifts, and there's some overlap between them. There's three key levels of abstraction, and I'll get back to answering your question, because ultimately you're taking an ICPM and saying, how can I do things that prepare me to get to the next level? So to do that, you have to know what is my current level and what is the next level. And then I'll even tell you what the next level is. So we'll go 3 levels. So when you're an ICPM, the product is the product. It's pretty simple. What's the business problem that I own? Or what's the sort of domain boundary that I own? What do I know about my customers? What are my key metrics? How am I moving them? So on and so forth. All the things that's kind of the core PM craft and skill set. The next level up from that, which is the group PM level, where you start to become a manager, the product is no longer just the product. The product is now the domain that you own. So typically you have anywhere from 3 to 6 teams, and those teams will have some synergy between them. And so you think about those collectively and how you're load balancing effort and how they're all doing. So that's the domain is the product. The people are now the product. Your job as a product leader is to coach people on how to improve their craft and how to better themselves. So you literally have to learn how to treat people as a product that you can grow and certainly hold accountable for performance. But so much of being an effective manager is not just delegating to people and then telling them what they did wrong and critiquing them, but actually helping them accelerate their own craft by teaching them what you know, and then guiding them as they're attempting it for them the first or second time and they're not quite proficient yet, but they know what the general form is. So the people are the product. And then third, process is the product. As you start to get critical mass of teams, people want to get into a routine. They want to get into a rhythm. You do not want to have every single one of your teams operating with completely bespoke processes. Yes, they can have their own local special sauce for however they want to maybe run certain agile ceremonies or how they want to track their roadmap or their OKR progress. But you have to have some standards because you need to start as a leader being able to look across that surface area and reason about it. So we'll talk about the next level if you like. But to answer the question, how can I, as an ICPM, start to flex to the next level? It's starting to think about the domain within which my product operates. So not just what matters to me, but also what matters more broadly. And am I the highest point of leverage? If I am, how do I articulate that case? And if I'm not, how do I support that area? And not thinking only locally about how you optimize for yourself. The people part, build high trust, high candor relationships with your peers. Something that will happen if you're successful in your career at some point is that your peers will be layered under you. If your peers view you as someone who's always out for themselves and is always using hardball tactics, they're not going to want to report to you. If they view you as someone who is first principles, who is great to work with, who wants to do what's right for the company, but also isn't a pushover and is like willing to hold their ground if they fundamentally disagree with something, that's someone that they're going to respect and be much more willing to report to. And certainly if you find other more junior PMs at the organization, you can actually be a mentor to them and think about how would I teach this person what I know in a way that doesn't force them to copy me as a facsimile, but I can teach them the general principles that I apply and then how I apply them, and they can start to think about how to make that their own. And then certainly, as we talked about, looking at the organization as a thing that I now need to start cultivating more leverage from. Like, don't be afraid to go to the people that are like one level up from you in that group PM or director level and build relationships with them. Understand how your product space interacts with them and what do they care about. That's what's going to give you the credibility to then become, in the future, if you want to get promoted, appear to that person. So that's a quick summary of some of the tactics I would suggest.
I think you're delivering exactly the stuff that made us so excited to have you on. Is you're such a structured thinker when it comes to the way you conceptualize the different responsibilities and these paths and increasing levels of scope. I imagine the PMs that are reporting to you and the group PMs and other folks that are reporting to you are getting a chance to model some of this behavior because they're observing you do it. So they're probably learning a ton from you through osmosis. And one day, if they get a chance to rise up the ranks and do the same thing, then I would imagine they'll say they learned a lot from you. So my question for you is, Did you learn a lot of these frameworks on your own, stumbling through things, banging your head against the wall, or have you had your own version of someone who's mentoring and showing you the ropes that helped you formulate a lot of your thinking on these things?
I would say it's literally a mix of both of those things. So I was actually thinking to myself the other week, I think I've had about 15 managers over about 15 years. Now, some managers turned over quickly, some managers I had for long periods. But when I look back, 80% of those managers are extremely like top 5, top 10% intellect, emotional intelligence. Like they're just wildly successful people. So I was just extremely lucky to, over the course of my career, have worked for some excellent, excellent managers. And I'd say a lot of what they taught me, I ended up incorporating and evolving over time and then forming more and more of a composite that became my own style. So I had the benefit of great managers and great coaching. I took what they taught me and I made it my own. And then I've also just been a continuous learner. Something that maybe we talk about in a separate podcast is there's so much tremendous high quality thought leadership out there. And if you can parse the difference from people that are like talking heads and giving you superficial advice versus deeply internalizing what are like the real first principles that I can absorb and then I can start to apply and create this growing library of logical primitives that I can then build up myself for any problem I'm facing. Like I've spent years and years cultivating that. Again, not just through absorbing from third-party sources, but a ton from my managers, a lot from my peers. Something that also happens is when you get to an executive level, your manager stops coaching you. And when my boss was managing a 1,000-person organization, I met with him maybe once every 3 to 5 weeks. And if I was meeting with him more, it was probably because there was a problem and he didn't trust me to handle it. So that was a good sign. But at that level, you don't really get coaching from your manager. You can learn through observing and absorbing from them, but you actually learn a lot more from your peers. So anyways, this is all to say, it's been a lifelong journey and definitely accelerated by having 80% world-class managers that are now chief product officers or executives at marketing companies, branding agencies. So I was just very, very lucky. And sometimes you're good, sometimes you're lucky. And I had a lot of luck.
That's awesome. And I know another thing that's you're big into is for professionals and self-development is one writing and then the other one is self-reflection. And I would love for you to touch a little bit of like how you do those two things. And in particular, like how does it help you improve and learn on a consistent basis?
Absolutely. So talk about writing. I've had some extremely strong writing culture-oriented managers. And I've come to believe that you can't have clear thinking without clear writing. You just can't, because sloppy thinking will result in sloppy writing and it can't hide. And it's very rare. Maybe you're one in a million, but there's very few people that are able to hold so much abstraction in their head that they can actually refine something without putting it into writing. And so just building that habit of writing, and it's going to be sloppy and it's going to be messy and it's going to be painful, but that's how you get better at doing it. You also might have heard practice doesn't make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect. So what does good writing look like? One, good writing has a very clear audience and goal. So who is my audience? What do I want them to take away or understand? And what do I want them to do? What's my call to action? That's always a good starting point. Sometimes you are the audience, right? And you're just writing for yourself. And that can be like self-reflection. So it's a very generalized framework. The second thing, you have to have logical structure. You already observed that the way I think about things is very structured. It has to be, because otherwise the logic breaks down. You have to be able to think in logical sequences that are durable if you go up or down that logic chain, because if you just have these weird breaks, then it's not durable. It's almost like physics or like law. It's like reasoning like law or philosophy. You have to start to be able to reason about arguments in novel ways and a consistent up and down the chain thinking. And I think that using a mental model, something that allows you to create some logical scaffolding for how you view whatever the problem space is what you then learn to develop and then iterate upon. And the writing process will help you expose flaws in that and to iterate and to refine it. The third thing is your writing should be simple and clear. I was listening to a Tim Ferriss podcast many years ago. And at the end of his podcast, he asked people, what are you listening to? What have you read? What's been most impactful? I forget who the guest was, but they mentioned there's this very, very short Dilbert blog called The Day You Became a Better Writer. You can Google it, we'll add it to the show notes. You can read it in 3 minutes, but it takes a lifetime to master. It's about how simple writing is the most compelling. And having come from a master's degree, there was all this like dense academic writing that I thought was what good, smart sounding, smart looking writing looked like. Over time, I realized that having very simple, compact, economically pruned language is by far the most effective for you to communicate and just to think, but also for your audience to receive whatever message you're trying to send them.
Do you carve out time just for writing that's like on your calendar, or do you write on an ad hoc basis just when you feel like you need to? Do you have any rituals around your writing?
No, I mean, I have a process now. It's just like ingrained into how I operate. I actually found that even I, despite all of these things I'm talking about, have a sense of discomfort going from I have a thing I need to write about to actually writing about it. And so the way that I overcome that, the hack that I found for my brain is actually I write stuff down on like mobile whiteboards. If I were to go through this list and just show you like all the scribbles that I put down, I mean, it's ridiculous, but this is how I get the initial mental model, the additional like thoughts that are in my head.
Legal pad guy. So I'm in the same boat as you.
And so it's almost like having a mobile whiteboard. And so once I've got the skeleton, the scaffolding out of my head, then that's typically when I'll then go into writing. And I'm sure you've all heard of the first principle of working backwards, right? Always work backwards from something. If you start with a blank page and you're not sure what you're going to do with it specifically, it's really daunting and it's really uncomfortable. So I find that just writing it on paper first gives me like a beginning and end and like generally how I'm going to structure this exercise. And then once I get into a Google Doc or into a sheet or whatever I'm going to do, usually it'd be a Google Doc because it's writing, yeah. I'm able to then start to flesh it out and to iterate, and I know end to end the body or the structure of what I'm looking for. So that's just how I get my work done. And so that's just become ingrained into me. So I do it as much as I need to. On the reflection side, I would say I reflect when I feel overwhelmed, when I feel like I'm underwater, my energy's low, I'm feeling burnt out, or I'm just struggling with something. And I'm pretty open with myself about that. And then I'll either take a weekend morning, find a time when your brain is at rest. I'm a morning person, so early Saturday or Sunday morning, or I will always do some reflective writing around the Thanksgiving and like Christmas, New Year's holidays, because I know I'm going to have some free time. And that's also been a big part of my process for reflecting on the things that have been challenging for me as I went through that big growth spurt, right? From 5 teams to 50 teams and all of that. How I adapted was actually recognizing through reflection some of the things that I just had to get some perspective on. I actually have, if you want to share it, I'm happy to have a sanitized doc that was from like 2019 after my first year at Wayfair, where I was talking about all these things. I'll share this with my mentees and people that are going through that same thing. And I'm like, look, I literally was there. I have a time capsule to go back and to show you like what I wrote to myself at that time. And it's all universal stuff, right? Of like feeling spread too thin, you're not getting enough leverage from your team, you're running from thing to thing reactively. And so just starting to put that down will allow you to start reasoning about what do I want to do? How do I want to have a plan that puts me on offense and to create agency to change that system dynamic rather than just to be flowing along on the river without any control.
Love it. And it seems like the trigger or the alarm is like, hey, like I feel stressed, overwhelmed. And then it seems like the process is you first write down everything that's stressing you out. And then once you have all those challenges or all those things, then you start to think, hey, how can I change my situation? Is that correct? Or do you have some prompts that you use to start that reflection process?
So I always have some sort of operating system that I'm using to manage myself, to manage my time. One of my managers early in my career was extremely structured, more structured than me, if you can believe it. And so we would have a daily stand-up. And I'd have essentially this backlog of things that I was going to be doing for the week, what I was going to be doing that day, and we would run through it. To some people, that might seem very micromanagey, but to me, I owned that list. And that was my first backlog, but it was structured. It was in an Excel sheet at the time. And so then as I kept that, even after I only worked with that manager for about 1.5 years, I kept that because I found it so useful to how I managed myself. And then eventually there came a point where as I was managing 3 to 5 teams, that backlog was taking me 2+ hours to refine on the weekends. And I was just getting lost in it to a point where I wasn't using it anymore. And I find that when you stop using the things that used to work for you because they break down and you can't scale them, and you just go without that thing, that's when you get into the danger zone where you really fall into reactive patterns because you don't know what you want to do and why. Therefore, all you can do is react to the stuff that comes at you. Yeah. And so what I would do, and I would reflect on, okay, that dynamic, the backlog didn't work. Why didn't it work? How can I update the mental model for how I can actually take less information and use that to then create intention around what I want to do and why? So as an example, the mental model that I use as a senior leader is 3 big buckets. First bucket is big opportunities, big bets. This is the bucket where I look at things that are on the horizon that could be disruptive, transformational. Maybe I don't even want to do it, but I know that it's there, right? Because as a leader, if you're only focused on the day-to-day of what your team is doing and you're only focused on incremental thinking, you definitely have blind spots. And so keeping something that's decently healthy on that big future bets, big future hairy opportunities list, you've got to have something on your radar. Whether you do anything with it at the time is up to you, but you should have visibility into it. The second bucket is the delivery machine. As you start managing large organizations, the organization itself becomes your product. And there's 3 subpillars to it. There's the people and how the people are organized. So do you have the right talent? Do you have the right team topology? Do you have healthy atomic teams? Like everything is done by people. And so thinking about that dimension of the delivery machine is critical. Second is tools and processes. Are people toiling with substandard tools? Do you have good process rhythms? Are people doing your quarterly road mapping or your monthly road mapping, your OKR updates or whatever it is on a rhythm? People like to be able to predict what's going to happen. And when you have high quality rhythms, people know this is the rhythm of business. This is how work gets done. And it's like marching and like with Jodi's, like people would like chant while they march. Like it allows you to march way further and with all this heavy stuff on you because you just get into that rhythm and it almost becomes like a trance. Like the point is, people don't like ambiguity. They don't like novel challenges to solve. They're going to have enough of those in the course of business, just the challenges that arise. So try to take as much of that out of your process as possible. And the third thing is, are you driving impacts and outcomes on the parts of your portfolio that are most important? If you look across 50 teams, you can't have a high point of leverage for all 50 teams. So if you were to synthesize that up and say, what are the 5 to 10 things that I really care about that I want to stay close to? How are those doing? Do I need to lean in somewhere? Have I gotten a good update on this recently? So it keeps you honest there. So that's the delivery machine. And the third and final bucket is organizational leverage. How am I creating that buy-in throughout the organization? We talked about that. So what I would do is on a monthly basis, I would look at that list and I would refine it. And I would say, 1, what is above and below the line for me this coming month? If it's below the line, I'm not even going to think about it or spend time on it unless something blows up and it comes my way. If something blows up and it comes my way, I know that I made that decision, by the way, which makes me much more comfortable because I didn't drop the ball. I put it on the ground and I knew that, someone might come along and step on it. So once I've done that, I'll then say, okay, what are the 3 to 5 things that I want to spend meaningful time on this month and really accelerate and move the needle on? And what would success look like if I were to make that happen over the course of the next month? And so those are like a little like lightweight monthly OKR setting for me. And then on a weekly basis, I'll spend about 15 to 30 minutes reviewing that list, just refreshing myself on it. And then again, on those monthly cycles, I'll have a longer hour to 2-hour refresh, depending on the level of entropy and what's going on. So I found that to be a really sustainable, successful rhythm for me. And by the way, talking about coaching your team, once you find something that works for you, that's how I'll coach my leaders. I'll say, create your portfolio. How would you put things in these buckets? And what do you think has the highest leverage and why, and so on and so forth? And that helps them build the muscle themselves. And I always tell people, this is how my brain works. This works for me. You should always feel like you can take this and you can adapt it to what works for you. But I'm just giving you an example of what I found to be helpful. But once you have it, make it your own.
Yeah, this is so valuable. You're definitely in the top percentile of structured thinkers that I've met in the PM world, and that's saying a lot. So I think my guess is that there's a lot of discipline that has to go into sticking with these frameworks and these processes and not getting sucked into chaos. You call it reactive mode, but let's say not your best self. Do you have any practical advice for people who feel like they may have fallen out of touch with their systems or their ability to, tap into whatever works for them and helps them be more proactive?
First of all, this happens to me still. It's never a perfect system. If you know what you're trying to do and you have a clear intent, you can then evaluate, am I not doing it because I need to increase my discipline? Or am I not doing it because it's not serving me anymore and I need to adapt it? One of my favorite truisms is that people hire products to solve problems. When you're in a deep, dark place of reactiveness and feeling overwhelmed and all those things, this is the thing that I have reached for that has gotten me out of that. So it doesn't actually take a lot of discipline. Like, I don't have to force myself to eat my veggies because this is the thing that actually keeps me sane. Any good product should have high ROI for the user, right? It should create leverage. So if you're doing this process right, it should create leverage for you because it allows you to have intention about where you're going to spend your time and why, where you're not going to spend your time and why, where you need to articulate that expectation to others. You can do so, and you can do so in a logical way because you've already reasoned about it yourself. A lot of times it's just being able to have that discussion with yourself and only yourself. In some cases, you do need to reset the expectation externally. But again, you're doing that from a strongly centered place. And personally, I have not found any other way to break that cycle of reactiveness. And Shreyas Doshi, I attended his time management seminar because I'm trying to grab bits from everyone, right? He had this saying that I think is so true. There will come a time in your career where you can no longer brute force your backlog by working harder or getting tasks done more efficiently. And once that time has come, it will never change. You can never solve the problem of being oversubscribed through those two levers, which have been how you've grown to your career up until that point. So the only way that I have found to sustainably get a lot of work done, to be perceived, and I think to actually have also been very productive and high output and high outcomes, but without having to work insane hours, which again, like diminishing returns. If you work 80, 90 hours a week, you're definitely not doing your best thinking in hours 60 plus. And if you are, you're the exception. So it's really, again, about working smarter. And how do you work smarter? You have to have a way of reasoning about where you think the most leverage is and treating your time as an asset that you are going to invest strategically. And whatever you do, having a system that's helping you gain that sense of control and intention about what you want to do and why.
Awesome. Yeah, maybe now shifting gears a bit, a spicy take that we both agree on is that a lot of the middle managers and upper level managers in product are not super competent. And I'd love to maybe get your take on one, why do you think that is? And then if someone who's listening to this resonates with that, what are some things that they can start doing today to be more effective managers?
So first of all, many managers think, I empower my team by delegating to them. I delegate stuff. I don't micromanage. Something comes through, I give my team that opportunity to step up and to take a big crack at it. That sounds good, and it may be appropriate, but it's often not. And so one of the things I talk about with folks that are either new to management or looking to grow in that kind of the middle manager tier is you should really think about 3 different levels of engagement with your team. One is teaching them. How am I going to teach you my craft? I'm assuming that you know nothing, and I'm going to whiteboard with you. I'm going to build that skill up for you. So teaching is one mode that you can engage in. Another mode is you can guide them. You know the general forms of this, but you're not yet proficient. And so I'm going to let you run with it, but I'm going to be heavily editing you and guiding you along the way because I know that you can't check your blind spots yet. You're not at that level. And then I can also delegate to you. But when I delegate to you, I'm going to judge the quality of your work product and it needs to meet my standards. And if it doesn't, I'm going to criticize you for that because you should be criticized because you're not meeting the standard. So being very clear on the expectation for how you're going to engage is really important because if you criticize the work product of someone that you should be teaching or that you should be guiding, it's going to make them feel like if I can't nail this out of the gate, I'm not good enough. And it just creates all these negative externalities versus someone that's a very senior contributor or you've worked with them for a long time. Then they should know how to do those things. And it justifiably so, if they have a miss, you should call them on it. So that's one thing. So delegating is not the only lever. It's just one of them. And you create leverage through that teaching, guiding, delegating progression. The other thing that middle managers do not do is they do not set clear expectations with their team and they don't create high trust, high candor relationships to keep an ongoing feedback loop on those expectations. I know so many managers that have one weekly standing series with their direct reports, and it's nominally supposed to be a status updates, blocking and tackling type meeting, and also development and feedback is also a section. If you do that and you actually ever talk about development and feedback, please tell me your secret, because that never happens. It never happens because that's the uncomfortable stuff that people want to avoid talking about. It's the elephant in the room, and it's easy to get lost in the weeds of whatever the urgent stuff is of the day and to not talk about that. So one of the things that I tell my directs that I do with them and that I expect them to do for their teams is they have to have separate series for development and coaching and feedback. If someone's more junior, you can do it more frequently. Like if someone is struggling, you probably want to do it like every 2 weeks, if not every week. If someone is more mid-level IC, probably once every 4 to 6 weeks. And if someone is more senior, probably once every 6 to 8 weeks. But the purpose of that meeting is to ensure that there's no place to hide from feedback and how things are going. And you're forced to talk about those. And no one should ever go into a performance review wondering what their rating is going to be, wondering what the feedback is going to be. Like, I'm sure we've all been there, right? Where we like walk in and it's trick or treat. Was I awesome or did I suck? And I don't know what it's going to be. That's a terrible spot to be. It creates so much unnecessary anxiety for employees. And the way that you get around that is by setting clear expectations, talking with your employee about them, make sure that there's common understanding of what the bar is and why, and then having a regular feedback loop where you discuss those. Here's another magical way you can give feedback much more effectively. Start by asking people to reflect on whatever the thing is you might give them feedback on. So we had this meeting or we had this artifact. How did you think it went? What are your reflections? A lot of the time, someone will already be aware of the feedback that you're going to give them, and having them voice that is such a better on-ramp to you then being able to contribute to yes, and also, right? You can have a really productive conversation about that. Or maybe they are completely unaware of the issue, and then you have to tell them what your assessment was and why. Or maybe it's somewhere in the middle. But by starting with the employee or the direct report self-reflecting, you get way more information on where their head is at, as opposed to you've got to come in and drop a summary judgment on them. The last thing I'll say on this is I have this template that I use whenever I'm starting a new direct report relationship, one-on-one norms and expectation setting. And the purpose of this meeting is to build trust and to talk about our common expectations for how we're going to work together. The building trust part, how do you build trust with someone? It's like this very amorphous thing. Well, it's you listen to them and you make them feel heard, and you also share some of your own personal feelings and experiences, because people will only be as vulnerable with you as you're willing to be with them. And as the manager, you set the tone for how vulnerable the relationship's going to be. So as an example, one part of this norms and expectation setting docs is what is the most helpful feedback you've ever received and what is the most unhelpful feedback you've ever received. Helpful feedback could be praise. It can also be constructive criticism, something that really helped you internalize, like a gap that you had. And then conversely, what's the type of feedback that has been really damaging to you, that you feel was very unproductive, unfair, that like really sets you against that person? Let's talk about those things very early in our relationship before we've had to wade through any of that ourselves. And sharing that is productive and useful, but it's also going to be highly trust building, because you start to actually get beneath those superficial layers with the person really quickly in a way that's contextually relevant, right? It's like you don't have to learn about their deepest, darkest fears from high school or whatever, but you're getting into stuff that kind of scratches that same itch, but it's relevant to the working relationship.
Yeah, I love this advice. Just thinking about candor and trust and establishing the right feedback cycles for people to be successful. Do you fall on either side of the spectrum between thinking it's important to double down on your strengths versus really focusing on rounding out your weaknesses? Do you think it just varies by individual, or do you have a framework for how to think about coaching people around that?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I'm gonna borrow some of what I've read out there that resonates with me. So I love Nikhil Singhal. If folks haven't heard of him before, he's a VP at Meta and was Chief Product Officer at Credit Karma. He has phenomenal coaching on career growth and thinking about these things. In general, I think that you should play to your strengths. Be aware that your strengths, your superpowers, can cast a shadow, where if you overutilize it, it can actually start to become a thing that works against you. But in general, play to your strengths. That said, you have to get your weaknesses to a level where they are serviceable for what's required at the next level. Something that I've seen very commonly is for very, very strong, logical, product-oriented PMs, especially technical PMs, like they spike in a whole bunch of areas of customer empathy, being able to have really strong product artifacts, strategy artifacts, PRDs, go-to-market plans, but they really struggle with communication, right? They struggle to build relationships with senior executives that are one or two levels above them. And they feel like networking is basically just like backslapping and like talking about the weather and the barbecue last weekend. And like, I'm not going to go have superficial conversations with people for no reason. Like I don't want to network because that's not me. And so I'll need to coach them on, hey, like reframe it. That's not what networking is. That's what bad networking is. That's what superficial people that are just out there to be seen but not add value do. And that's not what you should model. Real valuable networking is when you go to an executive or another person and you say, hey, listen, I'm this person in the organization. Here's my product domain. Here's the set of things that I influence, that I care about. And here are the things that I think from my domain might be of interest to you. Are those of interest? And do you care about them? And tell me more about them. And then is there anything else that you have on your mind that also intersects with me or that you'd like to learn more about? And if there's some good, meaty overlap there, then that becomes the basis for an ongoing relationship with that person where over time, as that list evolves, and it will, that's okay. But you actually have some real connective tissue with that person. And by the way, you're like going out into the organization and you're like getting signal from your executives. And so much of people trusting you and feeling like you have their best interest at heart is for them to feel like you understand what they care about and you understand what they're concerned about. And you don't get that unless you talk to them, unless you ask them questions. So for all those reasons, you can do some reframing, and maybe someone is never going to be a super networker. They're never going to be a super communicator. But when you give them a productive way and like a utility-based way to think about that interaction, that can help them get over that hump. But in general, I do think you just want to get your weaknesses up to a level where they're not liabilities. Otherwise, you should be trying to capitalize on your strengths.
Yeah, maybe the last topic that I'm excited to discuss that I know you're also very passionate about is PM organizational design. What was your team design like at Wayfair? What worked really well? What didn't? And what are your thoughts in general on the topic?
So when I joined Wayfair, we were largely organized where teams would own like workflows or teams would own tools. Say, for example, that you have a supplier. So Wayfair, we have tens of thousands of suppliers that add products to the site. Say that they would try to add a new batch of 1,000 products. And those 1,000 products should be broken out into a couple of different product groupings, and they didn't do that correctly. We would have a workflow that would basically allow us to consolidate and split apart product data to have it match our merchandising standards. So there was a front-end facing component to it. We'd have internal users, or we had a set of offshore agents that would go through this process. There was a whole bunch of back-end stuff going on, because when you merge product data together, you're literally taking everything. You're taking reviews, images, sales history, like all this stuff that in fact impacts so many systems, and you're glomming that together. And so that's largely how we were organized. What we found with that was we created a very disjointed experience across our users. So as those tools and sort of experiential silos got thinner and thinner, it became more and more jagged as you ran over them. And so the way that we evolved to modify that was to say, okay, let's think about any given product team. It should be focused on a single user and that user's end-to-end problems. And there were 4 core users at Wayfair. There was the customer as a user. There was the supplier as a user. There was the operator as a user. Operator is a catch-all for a high-volume captive internal workforce agent. Think, again, those offshore agents, or think about a 3D modeler, or think about a sales agent. It's like someone who has to use your tools and is an employee, and it's like a high-frequency usage. And the 4th group was other software systems / administrators. So there could be a front-end component, but an admin would be someone that might be able to change catalog-wide merchandising standards, right? And so the admin was a user, but really you were serving other software teams. That's a logical and reasonable way to organize your teams. I think the challenge that we ended up finding with that approach was because our tech stack was not fully matured, we had a lot of the front end and the business logic tightly coupled to the back ends of systems. If you were to have a more mature microservices oriented environment where the back end teams basically produce like primitives of functionality that you can pick off the shelf and you can daisy chain together and it's all pretty like hands off, I think that operating model that I described would work really, really well. The challenge that we found was when the team that cares about the customer's experience or the supplier's experience, but doesn't understand the backend data is structured, yet is very tightly coupled to it, is trying to move fast and to iterate, you create a lot of tension between those teams. And so I think really like one of my takeaways is that you need to unify dependencies as much as you can under a single leader. If I were to do a reorganization of how our teams had been structured, I would have looked at ways I could have merged components of a user-facing workflow and the backend data that supported it under a single leader. The best way to get people to work together better is to have them to report to someone further down the reporting chain. And I can say from experience, having spent most of my time at Wayfair in the catalog and merchandising domain, and then over my past year taking on all of our pricing and competitive intelligence systems and all of our supplier integrations, when all of that rolls up to you and you're like all in accountable for it, you do think differently about how you prioritize and allocate your resources. And when you have a smaller domain, like you're going to optimize that. And that's just like human nature. That's how we operate. And so I think about how I could draw those domains to maximize autonomy and agency and to minimize dependencies that are outside of any given leader's footprint. You'll never get it 100% clean, but I think looking at ways you can do that will help you move quickly and have more streamlined decision making.
Awesome. Another trend that I'm seeing in the Supra community is that a lot of the companies are shifting from a model of having their product teams organized by functions, all the product team reporting into the CPO, or all the engineering teams reporting into the CTO, to more of a business unit approach where you have a GM for one of the business lines or one of the business units, and then have a good amount of those functions reporting to that GM. I'm curious, Brenton, from your experience, one, when do you think it's a good idea to adopt this model based on what you were sharing? And two, what are some of the drawbacks or the side effects that people don't really think about that they should consider before making that shift?
Yeah. I think that having a GM by business unit would only make sense, in my opinion, for an extremely large enterprise scale company that essentially has each business unit operating as if it's its own sub company, right? So think like with Amazon, you have AWS, you have the large e-commerce retail business, you have so on and so forth, you have Kindle. I think in that model, there could be a world in which having a GM that is managing all the resources, because they're effectively the CEO. They have to be like a CEO level scope or an organizational complexity and also, frankly, organizational autonomy for that to make sense. I think for most organizations, that's not going to be your situation. If we're talking about venture-backed startups or like smaller public companies that are really built around one core product, maybe with some different business lines, I think giving every different business line its own GM that has its own captive tech resources is not going to work out well. And I can understand why you would want to do that. You would want to essentially have a single threaded owner. You'd want to empower a single person who has commercial responsibilities and P&L ownership to decide how they leverage their technology resources. There's a couple problems with that, though. One is those commercial leaders do not know what is possible with technology. Therefore, you are much more likely to find yourself going into that feature factory, project-oriented mode of delivery, which I know, Ben, you've said is not a bad place to be, but I think that's not the ideal because ultimately you're limited by the imagination of the leader to conceive of how they could achieve outcomes with what they can think of being built. And I think having a technology-oriented leader that is able to help take the outcome we want to achieve and then to think about different ways that could be made possible through technology, I think having that separation is really healthy. That said, if you have your different functional technology lines, which typically will be product, engineering, design, maybe you have an analytics function, I also think it's not good to have all of those reporting lines meet at the CEO because it does create friction throughout the organization to have those silos. And so what I have found is when you have an organization of sufficient complexity, which again, Wayfair as an example, we had our GMs at the CTO direct level, right? So we had probably, I don't know, 6 to 8 of those for very large subdomains of the company where product, engineering, design, analytics, data science would all meet under that leader. And then that leader had agency for thinking about how they use those technology resources to achieve business outcomes. So like the boss that I reported to managed a 1,000-person organization. He was the first GM level person in the organization. There were other instances where folks that weren't at that VP level would be GMs, but they were really in VP pipeline, right? So they were getting that experience on the path to being able to take on that title. But in general, I think you don't want to push technical GMs down too far into your organization, because then you get the other problem, which is overly localized decision making, and you don't think about things through a shared resource perspective. You don't want to have your own infrastructure stack for every single GM. There are some things that you want to share across teams, and you do want to have like economies of scale and simplicity with a shared resource at some levels. Ultimately, there's no clean answer. In general, the lower down in the reporting chart, you have people merging, the closer they will work together, the better they will communicate, and the better that leader will optimize over that surface area. And so if you go way, way too high, that leader gets too high of an altitude to really see what's happening on the ground. And if it gets too low, then you're making very locally optimizing decisions, and you have a bunch of silos that are redundant and conflicting and not really talking to each other. And so finding that sweet spot is a moving target, and one that I think changes as an organization matures and gets larger.
Great. One final thing I'd just love to get your thoughts on. It's something I've thought a lot about over the years, and I'm sure you've had to think about it as well and figure out how to motivate people. But what's your latest thinking or your current thinking on the degree to which people are driven by incentives? And how do you incentivize a GM? How do you incentivize a VP rolling up to a GM? Or how do you incentivize an IC rolling up to someone on your team or a GPM's team? How do you think about setting up the right incentive structures for people?
So I think in general, everyone's going to have a different internal equilibrium for what's motivating to them. And as a leader or a manager working with someone on your team, part of what I would do actually in that norm and expectation setting exercise is I would talk about essentially 2 horizons. Where do you want to go in your career over the short term? So 12 to 18 months. This is often I want to get promoted or I want to get to the next level. And then where would you want to go in the next 4 to 5 years? Do you want to be a leader? Do you want to get into management? Do you want to take this craft you've learned and apply to a different domain, so on and so forth? And just getting into a conversation with people about what motivates them. Is money the most important thing for them right now? Are they trying to save for their kids' college tuition or whatever it might be? And so it's just having an open conversation with someone and being open to and not judgmental about what matters to them. Because ultimately, what you want to do is align what they want for themselves with what the organization needs from them in a way that then aligns those incentives. So that's like at a local level. If you're thinking about how do organizations create the right incentive structures for leaders writ large, I think that one I honestly don't have a great answer to. And in general, I do think that aligning leadership compensation with equity is a great way to do that, because the company's outcomes is going to make you a part owner in that success. And I think that's one of the great ways that technology transfers wealth from the very high sort of leadership ranks into the broader employee population. I will say in the ZERP environment where like valuations are always up and to the right, that was much easier to do. There are real dangers to shareholder dilution. And I certainly experienced this at Wayfair, where like our stock went from $300 a share down to $30 a share. And in order for the company to make employees whole, with what their target compensation was, the amount of shares you have to issue goes up exponentially. You are essentially then asking your shareholders to pay for a large portion of your staffing costs. And so there can be some tricky dynamics there. But in general, I'm a big fan of equity as a way to reward and incentivize folks at all levels of the organization.
Yeah, I think my question was definitely more anchored on motivating individuals versus motivating organizations within an organization to the right direction. And one of the reasons I asked this is because you said it's good to understand how people think about what motivates them. And I'm curious how good people are at actually anticipating and identifying what motivates them, because I was at a startup that got acquired by Ford, and that pretty much wiped out our cap table, and we all stayed 2 years after the acquisition. And none of us got equity in Ford, but we had these large bonus pools of cash that we would get every 6 months if we hit certain goals. And everyone in the company was aligned to hit the same exact goals. And that was probably the period in which I saw the most organizational alignment within a group of people in my whole career, because there were very clear bonus pools. And if we hit very specific milestones, and we all got rewarded like financially with cash for doing that. And I felt it went against what the mainstream narrative is for how to incentivize small teams, which is with long-term equity, 4-year vesting schedule with a 1-year cliff. So I would have never been able to tell you that incentive structure would motivate people to work in a certain way. But what I observed in practice was that it was incredibly effective at motivating and aligning people. So I'm just curious if you have any reactions to that.
I'm really glad that worked. I think it can work. I'm sure you could also imagine a scenario in which that was either instrumented in a way, or if things had happened out of your control that resulted in you guys not getting good financial outcomes. And then you could fall to recrimination, blaming. It could become a toxic environment if the situation took a negative turn, potentially. I think when you have a group of people that are aligned around a collective goal and they rally towards it and they achieve it and they all get like the payoff, that's the best case scenario. And I think it's just thinking about how do we create systems that are resilient to entropy, things not working out, having some misses, and what we still want. I don't know if your targets, for example, were on a gradient. So when my teams do OKRs, we score on a 0 to 1 scale with a number of incremental scores in the middle. And so if you don't 100% hit your OKR, but you're like over 90% there, you get a 0.9. You can feel really good about that 0.9. And by the way, I don't ever want my team to hit 100% of their OKRs, because that means that we left capacity on the table. So anyways, I think there's ways of managing that. But again, some people in that situation that you described are going to be mostly motivated by the financial outcome of achieving success. Other people are going to be motivated by the sense of collective in it togetherness and like doing great work. And then the financial part of it is like a byproduct of that. I had a manager tell me once, and I really love this, there are basically 3 pillars to your satisfaction at work. There are the people that you work with, there is the work that you're doing and its stimulation and your belief in it, and then there's the compensation and kind of career advancement that you're getting from it. And if you can get 2 out of 3 of those to a good place, you can have a sustainable, generally happy existence. If you have 3 out of 3 of those, you better thank your lucky stars, because you've hit the jackpot, and that's what people are often searching for. And if you have 1 out of those 3 or less, it's probably not sustainable. And you should be thinking about either what would it take for me to get an additional 1 of those check boxes in terms of what I need and I'm looking for, or you might have to find a different organization, and it might just be time for you to move on. And so I think being able to, again, reflect on that for yourself and to help your team as you're coaching them reflect on those things, and to do so without them feeling judged. I think some people might say, I might feel, if I share that really what I'm looking for is to maximize my compensation growth over the next 18 months, that I'm a mercenary, that I don't care about the team, that I don't care about the work, and I might be judged for that. So as a manager, I really would rather you be very candid with me, and then I'll be candid with you about, if that's your goal, how can I help you do that while also doing the work the company needs to get done, right? I will try to be the translation layer to align your incentives with what the company needs, because I am in the position to understand what that is and to bend you towards it. And then we have that expectation going forward, and we talk about those things. I've had people that have told me, I literally just want to get 1 click up on the ratings for my level, because I know it's going to result in X% increase in comp. Okay, great. I will write you a calibration card that I think would make a very strong case for that performance rating. I can't guarantee anything to you, but I will write a mock calibration card, because I've written many of them before, and that's the artifact that people use to evaluate your score at the end of the year. And we will review that together. And as time goes on, we'll take the stuff that I stubbed out and actually bring the relevant stuff in. And that'll be the thing that forms our expectations contract. Again, it's not a checklist, it's not a promise to you, but it's a way that I can guide your expectations, and through which you can reflect on, and I can give you feedback on how you're tracking towards those. And we talk about that on a regular basis. And so there's never going to be any surprise trick or treat when it comes to your performance review. You're going to know where you're trending.
Awesome. Brenton, thanks so much for coming on. I think the Supra community, the broader product community is going to find this conversation incredibly helpful. So I'm really excited to share that with everyone. 2 final questions for you. One is, where can people find you?
So you can find me on LinkedIn. And I have started a Substack. We were having a thread in Supra a couple weeks ago, and Ben was encouraging me to take some of the stuff that I've written and thought about and just to publish it out there. So this will be a forcing function. So by the time this airs, brentonsellati.substack.com, I'll have some content out there. I do this because I love teaching. I love helping empower people. So if this resonates with you, I'd love if you were to check that out. I'd love feedback on it. And if it doesn't, I'm also first principles, right? Like I'm always learning and growing. So I would love your feedback. So yeah, Brenton Sellati on LinkedIn, and then brentonsellati.substack.com.
Awesome. Yeah. Ben's peer pressure is always very effective. And then the second one is, how can our audience be helpful to you?
I should have thought about this before you asked the question, but I would say be curious and be humble. I think product management is a really hard job. We have to constantly navigate novel problems that require us to think problems through ourselves all the time. And it's really hard. And it's easy to criticize others that are trying to do that. It's also easy to feel like, okay, I've got this blueprint that works and I'm just going to keep running that back. So stay humble, know that you can always grow, and stay curious, you can absorb. And that's going to be the best way for you both to grow and then also to add to and enrich our product community.
Amazing.
Thank you so much. This was great.
Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate it.
If you enjoyed this conversation, please share it with someone who you think would benefit from it as well. We really appreciate it. We'd also love a follow or a rating on Substack, Spotify, or YouTube. That's going to let other people find us. And if you have any topic recommendations for a future episode, please send myself or Mark a DM on LinkedIn. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks.